Welcome to a new episode from English Plus Podcast. Today is about pronunciation, and today we're going to differentiate between the long E and the short I. Now, before we start, let me remind you that you can find the transcript of this episode in the link I will leave in the description. And if you decide to become a patron of this show on Patreon, you will also get a PDF worksheet for this episode and for every episode we publish every day. So now, without further ado, let's start with the long E and the short I in this pronunciation episode from English Plus Podcast. What do we mean by the long E? That is when we talk about words like me, tea, or be. And the short I, this is when we talk about short I sounds like this, it, pin. This is the long and the short forms of E or I. Now let's start with the long E. Why do we need to care, and what kind of pronunciation problems occur if we pronounce the long E as a short I? We will have words that will sound like different words. For example, sheep will sound like ship, and eat will sound like it. So that being said, let's start by seeing how we pronounce the long E when it comes at the beginning of words. We have words that start with long E like eat, each, eager, eel, even, either, east, equal, easy. And sometimes the long E comes in the middle of words. For example, mean, seal, meal, please, leave, reach, seen, deep, police. And sometimes the long E comes at the end of words. For example, he, free, be, key, tea, knee, she, agree, and tree. And now let's come to the common spellings of this long E. This long E can be spelled as only an E, like he, or seen, or these. Or it can be a double E, like see, feel, and need. It can also be EA, like east, team, and cheap. And also, it can be an IE or EI, like niece, either, belief. So, that was what we need to know about the long E. Let's practice a little bit with some sentences that include this long E in some of the words we can find in those sentences. See you at 3. See you at 3. See what I mean? See what I mean? See you next week. See you next week. See you this evening. See you this evening. Pleased to meet you. Pleased to meet you. Steve eats cream cheese. Steve eats cream cheese. Lee has a reason for leaving. Lee has a reason for leaving. She received a teaching degree. She received a teaching degree. Now, if you want to benefit from this episode in particular, the pronunciation episode, it's a good idea if you repeat after me. If you repeat the same section again and again and try to repeat after me, because that is the point of the pronunciation episode in the first place. So that being said, let's move on to get some more practice and talk about the long E, see examples of the long E in context with this text that we have about the Beatles. What is a beetle? Maybe you think of a real creature who creeps and leaps about, but most people recall 4 English teens called the Beatles, who appeared as a rock group in the 1960s. Leaving bebop behind, the Beatles created a unique beat that appealed to everyone. Seen on American TV, they were greeted by screams and cheers. Please Please Me and She Loves You were among their many pieces. They even received an award from the Queen of England. The team broke up as they reached their peak, but each member continued his own career. The world grieved the loss of their leader, John Lennon, who died in December 1980. Although only briefly on the scene, the Beatles created meaningful music that will be here for an eternity. Of course, I exaggerated the long E's a little bit. When you read something like this, you don't have to stop at E every time. Of course, you don't have to say the Beatles created meaningful music that will be here for an eternity. No, you don't do that. Of course, you say the Beatles created meaningful music that will be here for an eternity. But the idea of practice, for the sake of practice, we need to make them a little bit long just to make sure that we differentiate between the long E and the short I. And now, talking about the short I, let's move on to talk about the short I and see the difference between the long E and the short I. Now, why do we have to care? Why do we have to be sure to pronounce the short I instead of the long E? Because if we don't, hit will sound like heat and itch will sound like each, which are two different words in this case. So, without further ado, let's see the short I at the beginning of words. We have many words that we know very well that start with the short I, like is, if, ill, ink, itch, inch, into, issue, it. And sometimes the short I comes in the middle of words. For example, pin, simple, lift, miss, listen, timid, winter, minute, and little. Now, the short I does not come at the end of English words, so we don't have examples for that. And now let's look at the common spelling of the short I. The short I can come as a Y, like gym, symbol, and system. Or it can be a UI, like in build, quick, and guilty. Or it can simply be an I, like sin, lips, with. So now it's time to have some practice and see this short I in some sentences. Like when we say, this is it, this is it, this is it. The three words here have a short I, and it's a very famous phrase as well. This is it. What is this? Is this? What is this? Not what is these. What is this? This is my sister. This is my sister. This is Miss Smith. This is Miss Smith. Give my list to Lynn. Give my list to Lynn. My little sister is timid. My little sister is timid. Is the building finished? Is the building finished? Did you give him his gift? Did you give him his gift? And now let's see the short I in a short paragraph that talks about the Winter Olympics. Since 1924, the Winter Olympics have been an international event. Now, these activities are seen by millions on television. Men and women from distant cities and countries participate in this competition. They all wish to be winners. They ski downhill amidst pretty scenery. Figure skaters spin to victory. Skill will make the difference. Some will finish with a silver medal, some with a gold, but all will win our hearts and infinite respect. Now here, as you can see, most of the short I was an I, and that is the most common spelling. But if you notice, we have an irregular pronunciation for the word women. The word woman in singular, we say woman with W-O-M-A-N, but when we say it in plural, W-O-M-E-N, we pronounce it like women with a short I in the place of the O, W-O, women. So pay attention to that. And now that we have learned the difference between the long E and the short I, let's see them together side by side. And let's see how if we change the pronunciation, the word itself is different. We're talking about a different word. For example, least and list. These are two different words, least and list. Seat and sit. Seat is obviously different from sit. Heat and hit. Heat and hit. Or feet and fit. Feet and fit. Leave and live. Leave and live. Leave is L-E-A-V-E. Live is L-I-V-E. And by the way, this live is different from live. When we talk about shows on TV that are live, the word is spelled the same, but is pronounced in a different way. Live, when we say, for example, I live in this place or I live in that place, that is the live we're talking about here. But the live show, which is a different thing, it is spelled the same way, but it is pronounced differently. Okay, so let's move on. Feel and fill. Feel, F-E-E-L, and fill, F-I-L-L, which are two different words. And now let's see, there's a big difference between saying heat it now or hit it now. Heat it now, maybe we're talking about some kind of food. Heat it now. But hit it now, maybe we're talking about some kind of dangerous animal who is trying to attack you, and somebody says, hit it now. What if we say change the wheel, like the tire, or change the will? The will is what you want to do, and whether you have the will to do it or not, change the will with a short I. And obviously, the spelling is different as well. W-H-E-E-L for wheel, W-I-L-L for will. Did you feel it? Did you feel it? I'm talking about some feeling. Something happened, and I'm asking you, did you feel it? Feel, long E, or maybe I'm talking about some cup. Did you fill it? Did you fill the cup? That's so different. So if you come and tell a person, did you feel it, and you mean fill it, it's totally different. So that's why it's very important to differentiate between the long E and the short I. And now, the meal was big. The meal, I'm talking about the food I ate. The meal was big. But the mill, the place where they grind grains and stuff, that's called the mill, M-I-L-L. The mill was big. I visited a mill and the mill was big. But I ate a meal and the meal was big. I am so full now. He will leave. He will leave. Don't let him leave. Don't let him go. Or I'm just telling you he will leave. Whatever. Maybe you should let him go. Or he will live. He will live. He had an accident and the accident was dangerous, but he will live. He will not die. Leave and live. And now, to finish off, I have a very special poem by Christopher Marlowe. It's called The Passionate Shepherd to His Love. And here, it's not important if you understand everything about the poem or not, because this is not a lesson about poetry. The important thing, we will see them both, the long E and the short I, side by side in one place, and a beautiful place, to be honest. A beautiful poem by Christopher Marlowe. Let's start. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that hills and valleys, dale and field, and all the craggy mountains yield. There will we sit upon the rocks and see the shepherds feed their flocks by shallow rivers to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. Thy silver dishes for thy meat, as precious as the gods do eat, shall on an ivory table be prepared each day for you and me. With that being said, I would like to thank you very much for listening to this episode. As I told you, practice is very important to improve your pronunciation. So maybe you want to replay some parts of this episode, listen again, try to repeat. And don't forget that you can find the transcript of this episode and, more importantly, the PDF worksheet that you can download and practice what you learned in this episode today if you decide to become a patron of this show on Patreon. I will leave links to everything you need in the description. This is Danny, your host, saying thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast, and I will see you next time.